Good afternoon, everyone. Today, we are going to discuss an important issue, that is the health of Indian economy during COVID-19 pandemic. And now we're in the second wave of COVID-19, and a lot of discussions are, of course, taking place. How this Indian economy has been impacted, and whether again this is going to continue, because in the beginning people discussed that all the economies around the world will be affected, and this will be like the 1929 Great Depression, and then there would be V-shaped recovery, and K-shape and different shapes of recoveries were also discussed. And many organizations have come up with different studies, how different sectors have been impacted, starting from employment, poverty, education, health, gender discrimination, harassments, and so on. So uh, today we shall cover some of these issues during our discussion. And now, without much delay, let me introduce the panelists. And again, for the so let me introduce the panel members here. Today we have with us Dr. Sitakant Panda, who is working at IIT Bhilai, and prior to that he worked at IIM Amritsar and ICRER, and then he has also worked at ISI Bangalore, and then he obtained his PhD from IIT Delhi, and he has also worked in media, as I understand. Okay, and then he's basically, his specialization is political economy, and we very often discuss. We usually a very long conversations, and then Dr. Panda explains me basically his areas of research and how his political economy is not like the classical political economy that usually we think of. Welcome, Dr. Sitakant Panda, and I thank you for accepting our invitation to join this panel discussion. Then we have with us Dr. Prabhas Mishra. Dr. Prabhas Mishra works at Oxfam India, and Dr. Prabhas Mishra is currently working as Assistant Manager, Research and Knowledge Management in Oxfam India. He has extensively worked on development economics, public finance, and policy issues. Before Oxfam, he has worked on development research with various national and international organizations. He holds a doctorate degree in economics from Utkal University. He's a regular columnist. In fact, people from Odisha would be reading his articles very often in all Odia newspapers, and he has very good understanding of the public finance. And in fact, Dr. Mishra would be talking about the health inequality aspects. And before we started the discussion, we were having a very deep discussion, and he is telling that now Oxfam India is working on a very interesting report, that is discrimination index. So we will be definitely interested to read those findings. And we all know that Oxfam has been publishing very interesting reports on the inequality. And I think whenever around the world we talk about inequality or concentration of wealth, after Thomas Piketty, I think everyone refers to the Oxfam reports. Okay, that how some 52 or 60 people own half of the world's wealth. Okay, so whenever we use those numbers, we refer to the Oxfam report. So we'll be hearing more from Dr. Prabhas Mishra. I welcome Dr. Prabhas Mishra to this panel, and I thank you also for accepting our invitation. And then we have Mr. Om Mahapatra. Om Mahapatra is a chartered accountant, and he has very long experience in the corporate world, and particularly he has worked in KPMG, right? If I okay, let me tell the details. Mr. Om Mahapatra. He studied his CA in Delhi and completed his graduation from Delhi University. After clearing his CA, he went to KPMG Gurgaon as a trainee for 3 years, and he has handled clients like Honda, Panasonic as an in charge at a very young age, and he has served KPMG for 6 years, and he's also pursuing different certificate courses from different foreign countries also. And as I understand, chartered accountants continue their studies and they obtain various degrees. In fact, for information, my younger brother, he's also a chartered accountant and he done adding different degrees to his CV. Okay? And he has started his fintech startup, which is basically it is actually fin strategy consultancy in 2018, which is mostly into fundraising, merger and acquisition, portfolio management, corporate treasury, and healthcare consulting. He's also a frequent panelist on TV channels and newspaper columnist. He is advisor to various corporates. He is writing a book on business with title Sustainability to Stability and Scalability. Very interesting book. So I wish all the best for your new book, Mr. Mahapatra. And I also thank Mr. Mahapatra and I welcome you to this meeting. And for the audience, let me inform you like who is going to cover what all things. Okay, I will be speaking very briefly about the macroeconomic indicators, how growth is going to be impacted, how is government managing the finances, all those issues. Then Dr. Sitakan Panda would be talking about the labor issues, the poverty issues, and employment issues. And Dr. Pravas Misra would be talking about health inequality, particularly the report released by Oxfam India. And and Mr. Mahapatra, O Mahapatra, chartered accountant, would be talking about the corporate finances. In fact, many of you would be reading a lot of newspapers articles that no, the economy is going down, but corporates, the share market is going up. And how is it happening? So the all the stories of corporate world will be shared by Mr. Mahapatra. So with this brief note about this panel discussion, let me get into a very brief presentation on the Indian economy, basically how the growth has been impacted and uh, macroeconomic issues. Some numbers about how COVID has impacted the world. 203 million people, are, or it is almost 204 million people are infected in COVID-19, and the death numbers are also more than 4 million. And then in coming to India, okay, again the numbers are increasing, and then some countries have already experienced a third wave, and nobody knows how many waves would be coming. Different new mutants are coming up, so nobody is basically sure how many people will be infected and how many people will die. And coming to India, we have seen about 3.1 crore people are already infected and 4.3 lakh people have died. And one good thing is that now in India the vaccination is increasing rapidly. Now people are also showing much interest in getting the vaccine. So we should be hopeful that the COVID-19 would come under control very soon, and so that at least the death cases or infections are minimized in future. Now, our major concern here is, today we are going to discuss how this is impacting the economy. Okay? And in fact, before the COVID-19 came to this planet Earth, we were basically aiming for a $5 trillion economy, and but no, I don't think that but okay. Basically, Prime Minister Modi had announced that by 2025 we will achieve a $5 trillion economy, and at present, again, nobody basically is sure about that whether we can achieve a $5 trillion economy very soon, and So now the growth has been badly impacted. Of course, before COVID-19 also you will see that the growth numbers were not very high and people were very much critical of the growth numbers. And of course, there was a controversy also in the growth numbers due to the change in the methodologies and change in the base year and so on. So there is already a slowdown in the growth process. However, up to 2016, 17, the growth numbers are again picking up to 8.3. But then all of a sudden we see in 2019-20, when the COVID-19 impact started impacting the economy, the growth numbers started falling to 4%. And the first year of COVID-19 was 2020-21, and then that has brought down the growth numbers to negative 7.3. And in fact, this is still a good number, actually, you can say, because we were expecting actually probably in worse scenarios. People were expecting a double-digit contraction in the GDP, and so compared to that, actually, definitely negative 7.3 is still a good number, because we had probably the strictest lockdown in the world, and so that basically impacted. And probably I don't know actually whether you can really blame anybody, because all the policy responses were actually coming as a knee-jerk response, because even till today, doctors do not know actually what should be the ideal treatment, and similarly what should be the ideal response actually to the disease. So, but yeah, this is the reality that our GDP contracted by 7.3% in 2020-21. Now to see the quarterly figures, then in the first quarter we had actually the serious impact, that is 24 or 25% contraction in the first quarter of 2020-21, and then things improved gradually. In the second quarter, negative 7.4, and third quarter, we are coming to the positive quarter and 0.5, and then fourth quarter, almost 2% growth. So that's our overall negative 7.3% contraction during 2020-21 fiscal year. And since the base year is already base number is now okay, the GDP numbers in 2020-21 is already low. We were expecting a double-digit growth in 2021-22. Okay? And again, people are also quite skeptical about this because because of the second wave and third wave. No, I'm thinking that probably now policymakers have become quite conscious, and I don't think that we are going to see a contraction anymore. Definitely there will be positive growth, but then how much we have to wait and watch. And when the growth numbers go down, definitely employment gets badly impacted. Okay? And because all the in fact in the first phase of lockdown, which was the strictest one, all the industries are shut down, all activities are shut down. So now we see that in May and June 2020, we had the highest unemployment rates. Okay? And that was almost 27%. Okay? And in urban area it was much higher, in rural areas it was a little less, but then overall it was close to 25% during during May 2020. And then unemployment rates had actually again gone down, but then again second phase of lockdown 2021, again during this May-June period we see that again unemployment rates are rising, but not as large compared to the last year, which was 25%. And for your information, usually in a normal time period, our unemployment rates in India remain around 5 to 6%. Okay? So when you see these unemployment rates going up to 25% or 15% also, that is quite a big number. And again, there are also a lot of debates around this employment thing, because we had a jobless growth during 1990s, and then things are improving a little bit. But then the recent decade, again is debated as job loss growth. So from jobless growth, that means output was growing, but employment was not growing. That was a jobless growth period. But then now it is job loss growth. That means your output is growing, but your employments are falling continuously, and that is due to the automation. People can also say due to use of artificial intelligence and too much of mechanization of everything. In every sector, we see that employment is falling, and that is also the major concern that because the reason behind the growing inequality is basically falling unemployment. So that's a major concern, and this pandemic has basically accentuated the problem. And in fact, this has multiple impacts. Actually, I think my other panelists actually would be covering all these issues: the impact of the consequences of the rising unemployment during COVID-19. Then coming to the impact of this unemployment, Azim Premji University has come up with this report, State of Working India 2021. And this report basically concluded that the first wave of COVID-19 has pushed 23 crore Indians into the poverty trap. For your information, we have the poverty numbers for the year 2011-12. After that, we do not have even any statistics about the poverty estimates. And in 2011-12, we had 21% people of India who were below the poverty line. And if you add, so that means out of say, in 2011-12, our population would be probably around 110 or 120 crores. And 21% would be 21 plus again another 3-4, so about 25 crore people are already below the poverty line, and then another 23 crores have been again added to that. So we can say at present about 50 crores people would be living below the poverty line, and that means COVID-19 has done a huge damage actually to the poverty alleviation objectives of the country. And now when you think about the growth, the unemployment and the poverty, we all will think, how is the government responding? In fact, we all would expect that government should do everything. But yesterday I was just listening to the speech of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru in 1951. And just I was hearing, because we are very soon going to celebrate 75 years of independence. So I was thinking just to make a comparison, actually, what all changes have happened. Okay? But in 1951, when our first plan actually we were going to launch, and Nehru was telling that, okay, we might not have much resources, okay, and but no, we have to achieve faster economic growth, and we have to basically alleviate the poverty. So poverty alleviation has been the slogan starting from independence. And so Nehru was telling that probably government will not be able to do everything. That is, people need to volunteer also, okay? And people can come up to construct a school building, a hospital, a road. So that's what he was basically urging the people of the country, that government has limited resources, and that is how people should also come forward. Okay? And I think that impact would be that you can see many schools were also opened by the villagers, okay, or the local people took initiative, and there's so many things have happened, because of the voluntary contribution of so many people. So why actually I raise this issue? Because nowadays actually we believe that government should do everything. So I think there is major change that has happened. In fact, when I look at the village economy also, nowadays we expect that government should do everything. Okay? And whenever there is a crisis, government has to come onto the rescue. Maybe the Keynesian idea has got much popularity, and also different theories of public expenditure also tell us that that when the nation becomes a welfare nation, we start demanding actually everything from the government, okay? And probably for a valid reason, although people should also contribute. But during this crisis, we would expect that the market will not come forward, okay? Because the investment climate or the business climate is already down. So market will not invest enough, and so the employment opportunities will be low, and that will aggravate the demands. Basically, if there is no employment, there is no income generation, then the demand will go down, and that will again further pull the growth rates of the economy. So that's it. There is pressure on the government expenditure. That we demand that government should spend more and more, but then from where government will get the revenue? Because we would expect that when growth rates are low, your tax revenue generation will also be low. The tax revenue, non-tax revenue, all revenue generation will be quite low. So in such a situation, from where actually government will get the revenue to spend? Okay, people can say that. Not some people have gone to the extent saying that no, government should print money and spend. Okay, and again, many economists have also said that no, this is not the right recommendation, that the government should not print money and spend. But however, there have been arguments that government should spend enough money, okay, to compensate basically the fall in the investment in the by the private sector. Now, if you see this these graphs, then we see that the revenue has been badly impacted. Look at year 2020-21, the yellow bars. Now we see that our revenue collection has fallen drastically from say 20 lakh crore in 2020-21 budget estimate to the revised estimate. You see that we could mobilize only something around 15.5 lakh crore, and for this year we have estimated to spend about 17.8 lakh crore, and nobody knows actually whether we are aiming to mobilize this much of revenue in this year, and nobody knows whether we'll be able to mobilize this much revenue. But of course, there are some indications that revenue collections are increasing, and I think Mr. Mahapatra would be talking about these numbers also in details. And then coming to the capital receipts are basically borrowing. So you see that the borrowings have gone up significantly. In a normal year, say in 2019-20, before the arrival of the pandemic, we used to borrow quite less. Okay? And now the borrowing amount from 10 lakh crore to almost 19 lakh crore. Which is huge. There is a huge jump in the borrowing. So we can have some sympathy for the government in the sense that the government has almost doubled the borrowing amount, okay? And so government has actually risen to the occasion, you can say, and it has spent enough money actually to revive the economy. Of course, the demand is that since there is a lot of crisis in migration, migrant labors, and unemployment issues, so people have been demanding that government should even spend more and more. But then, and this is again for the central government, okay? And in briefly, I'll tell you the situation of the state governments, how they have done things. Okay, coming to the expenditure, you see that the revenue expenditures have gone up. In fact, if you see the budget estimate and revised estimate, then the central government's revenue expenditure has gone up. Basically, we have seen that the central government has given a lot of basically stimulus packages and different like free rice, and then housing schemes for migrant workers, and different schemes have been announced during this pandemic. And the capital expenditure has also gone up. In fact, many people had suggested that during this time we may reduce the capital expenditure and we should increase the revenue expenditure. For your information, when we say revenue expenditure, it includes the salary, the pension, and all welfare schemes, actually you can say. Okay, salary, pension, and subsidy. These are major revenue expenditures of the central government. And capital expenditures are basically the expenditures on the new projects. Okay? And so there is basically recommendation that government should give more and more subsidy. Government should do also direct income transfer. But again, we see that yes, government has actually done certain things. That's how our revenue expenditures have gone up significantly, and capital expenditures have also gone up significantly, and because government has basically borrowed significantly. Looking at the deficit numbers, in fact, everyone was worried about the deficit. People thought that deficits will go up significantly because tax revenue collection would go down, and we see that fiscal deficits have really gone up. From say before pandemic, it was 4.6%, and in 2021 it went up to 9.5%, so almost double fiscal deficit. Similarly, revenue deficit from 3.3% to 7.5%. Okay, and primary deficit and effective revenue deficits, all these things have gone up. So government has borrowed quite a lot. And again, for your information, the state governments probably have not done enough, I would say. state governments have played safe. They have reduced their revenue expenditure as well as capital expenditures. Although state governments were given extra fiscal space, especially to borrow up to 5% of their GSTP. I think not a single state in our country has utilized that fiscal space. Very few no states have done that, and we have also observed that the poor states have not spent much. In fact, not a single poor state actually has used that fiscal capacity. Rather, a few rich states have borrowed more, but definitely actually not a single state has used that 5% fiscal space, 5% of their GSTP that they could have borrowed. So, and why actually I'm emphasizing that states actually have important role, because if you see the budget of government of India, this would be say about 32 lakh crore, and if you look at the combined budget of all the states, this should be about actually 40 lakh crore. So combinedly, states have more fiscal power than the union government alone. Okay? So when we are talking about the impact on the economy, this is the fiscal impact of both the union government and the state governments that can revive the economy. So anyway, so we see that government of India has actually increased definitely. Of course, we can say that the stabilization role lies on the union government, so that's the union government should spend, and yes, it has actually done to some extent. But then, yeah, there is always a demand that it should do more. And coming to the revenue collections, we see that now there is a revival trend in this year, particularly in April. If you look at the GST collection, we see that it has actually it has been actually quite satisfactory, and in fact the GST collection has been 5% overall revenue collection. In fact, not GST alone, overall revenue collection have been 5% growth, annual growth, which is whether this is satisfactory or not. We should know that before COVID-19, our average annual growth of revenue was about 8%. Okay, so when we say 5% growth, definitely this is not actually enough. And when there is a contraction and 5% growth, definitely this is not enough. But we should not be pessimist all the time, because since there is a trend of recovery, we can say that okay, this is a good thing. Probably in the coming days, things will be much better. But however, there is a trend break in the revenue collection. Usually, when you look at the direct tax, within direct tax, you have corporate income tax and individual income tax. Usually, corporate income tax used to contribute more to the direct tax collection. But during this pandemic, we have seen that the individual income tax has exceeded the corporate income tax. Now, in fact, it has a lot of implications also. People may say that it will aggravate basically the inequality. Corporates are not giving tax, individuals are giving more tax. Corporates make more profit, but they don't contribute to the tax revenue. So these are the implications. But yeah, this is the reality. In fact, people are also critical again that before pandemic, government had given given a tax reduction to the corporate sector, and that's how people say that probably this is due to that tax reduction before the pandemic. That is why now corporate sector is contributing less to the direct tax collection of the country, and individuals are contributing more. Now, coming to the RBI policy, in fact, I was going through the recent monetary policy announcement of Reserve Bank of India, and we see that RBI is now quite optimistic, because it analyzes the high frequency data, and based on that high frequency data means basically it uses the registration of automobiles, electricity consumption, and other consumer durables, and it says that things are improving. Okay? And but we see that now inflations are also quite high. So in such a situation, what should be the monetary policy response? So RBI has been announcing that okay, we are taking accommodative monetary policy, and it says that both fiscal policy, monetary policy, and sectoral policy should come together basically to support and nurture the nascent and hesitant recovery. These are the words used by RBI. So the recovery is again is at nascent stage, and again there is also a lot of hesitance whether this recovery would sustain or not. So in such a situation, monetary policy cannot be tightening to basically control the inflation. That's why it has taken accommodative monetary policy stance. And so it says, RBI says there are mixed signals. Industries, of course, are not demanding more investment. But however, the capacity utilization has improved, and we see that other high frequency indicators, it is showing basically no, that there is a recovery. However, the inflation rates have gone up to 6.3%, which is basically more than the target that we have got. RBI has got 4% as target to control the inflation, and plus and minus 2%. So that means it can vary from 2 to 6%, but now it is 6.3%. So it is basically definitely a matter of concern, and it is basically due to the rise in the fuel prices. Okay? And RBI is projecting that in the year 2021-22, that is the current fiscal year, we may achieve about 9.5% growth. And because of the second wave, these numbers have been downward revised. And so these are the basically growth projections for different quarters. In the first quarter, it would be about 21.4%, because last year first quarter had no negative 24.4% growth. So obviously, in the first quarter of this year, since the base is low, there would be a high growth rate. And in the second quarter, 7.3, in third quarter, 6.3, and fourth quarter, 6.1% growth. And in the first quarter of 2022-23, RBI is basically forecasting that there will be 17.2% growth. Coming to again the inflation, yes, inflation. It is basically expecting that RBI is expecting that in 2021-22 inflation would be around 5.7%, and in all the quarters it would be below 6%, but it is very close to 6%. So that is also a matter of concern. And as RBI has already announced, it is basically taking an accommodative monetary policy stance, because it is now giving priority to the growth, and not so much emphasis is being given for the inflation. And inflation has not deviated too much from the target. So that would be probably the reason why RBI is taking the accommodative policy stance. So with this, I conclude, and basically I wanted to give you the picture of basically the macroeconomic picture, and my other panelists should be covering other aspects, particularly employment, poverty, and other things. So without much delay, let me invite Dr. Sitakant Panda to share his views on how the economy has been impacted. Yeah, so it's over to Dr. Panda.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Das, for giving me an opportunity to share my views in this discussion. See, we all know that economics is a dismal science, and all these discussions that have been there around, about the COVID time economies in the last 2 years have been pessimistic. In general, pessimistic, right? So COVID has actually confirmed that nowadays that economics is more of a dismal science. Obviously, it's not happy times for the economy, because we are currently heading in, towards an uncertain but critical moment in our history. We have faced, India has faced a sustained yen patch, as it has shrunk by a record 7.3% in 2021. We have seen this in the very comprehensive presentation done by Dr. Das short while back. So this contraction in economic growth was also pretty much higher than the 3.3% contraction of the world economy in 2020. So our contraction was by 7.3%, and the world economy was 3.3%. And in other words, what I'm trying to say is we have actually done very, very poorly with respect to both our own past and the rest of the world. So now many economists, as well as the government, are expecting that the economy will return to its pre-pandemic level of GDP only next year, that is 2022. So it effectively means that this COVID pandemic has taken away or has cost India 2 years of lost income growth. Do you get this? So we also say when it rains, it pours, right? And this is not the only bad news. So if you can recall, and if you have seen the presentation of Dr. Das sort of back, prior to the COVID contraction, India had seen almost 13 quarters of continuous decline in real GDP growth. So you can, so you remember the double whammy of slowdown and lockdown times when the economy went through an unprecedented market shock. So there was a continuous period of slowdown, right? And many economists believe that this backdrop, this context of declining growth coming into the pandemic, and then the precipitous COVID contraction, both have resulted in reversal of something big, right? What's that? I mean, it has literally undone decades of progress that India has done in poverty reduction. I mean, in the post reforms period, 30 years have gone by, and all these poverty reduction policies have potentially been undone. So many people are back into the poverty trap, as we just saw in the presentation short while back, right? So here we need to have a little background, right? So the percentage of Indians living below the poverty line in 1985 was almost the same as in 1952. So in effect, India actually made no progress in poverty reduction between 1952 and 1985. It is only after the post-reforms period that India began making significant progress in fighting poverty. There have been many poverty researchers. I mean, Martin Ravelian of Georgetown University, he is actually regarded as an authority on poverty estimates. One of his study that was done in 2016 with his co-authors, they have found that during the period 1992 to 2012, the headcount ratio had declined by around 25 percentage points. So cumulatively, the post-reform period had actually lifted 200 million people out of poverty between this period, I mean 1992 and 2012. Do you get this? So this was very significant, right? And all of a sudden, I mean, in a matter of say 2 years, all this progress that we have done was literally undone. Now the big, I mean, we also know that the big difference that we have done between this pre and post liberalization edges was actually the doubling of the GDP growth rate, right? So, and when economy grows, it has several good consequences in its trail. So now, I mean, there was a time when the wage gap between disadvantaged social groups and the dominant social groups was actually narrowing down. Victoria Natkovska and Amartya Lahiri, they have studied this. Saurabh Pal at IIT Delhi, he has also studied this. I mean, the inequality, income inequality across different sections of the population was actually being reduced prior to the COVID pandemic, right? But in the process, this was actually, this did one thing, right? It lifted economic fortunes of a lot of people in our country. A recent Ajim Premji University study shows that 230 million people, I mean 23 crore people, right? You have just seen the earlier presentation. 23 crore people or 230 million people may have fallen below the poverty trap, right? They may have become BPL, right? So, and remember these studies by Ajim Premji University or Pew Research Center, there were several think tanks. They have broadly come to this conclusion that many people have fallen back into poverty, right? And remember, the very important thing is, these studies do not even consider the ravages of the second wave of the COVID pandemic. And these studies also do not consider the effects of the financial health of households and farms. So, I mean, the situation may have worsened further, right? So the main takeaway from all this, whatever I'm saying, from this contextual analysis of India's poverty experience, poverty alleviation experience, is that the most effective way of reducing poverty and lifting them out of poverty or helping the poor is actually faster growth cliff, faster economic growth. Social welfare programs, they will work through several redistributive schemes. They are fine. They can at least be complementary mechanisms to growth, right? And they will provide social insurance against bad luck in the labor market or health exigencies, etc. But if economic growth is absent, relying on these redistributive welfare programs and dole-outs to fight poverty will spoil everything and will only guarantee a lot of poor people falling back into the poverty traps again. It is. So the COVID pandemic effectively has had a lot of implications for the labor market. I mean, during the last year, COVID-struck labor market had faced lockdown. There has been huge unemployment. Like last I checked in the CMI Center for Monitoring Indian Economy website, their latest estimates show a 30-day moving average, as you also probably have seen in the earlier presentation. The current unemployment rate is 7.5%, right? And yesterday's published food inflation rate is 5.59%. Now, for the 7.5% of the people, unemployed people, right? This 6% inflation is also very painful. And add to this, there is distress migration from urban to rural areas. Of course, that has seen a recent drop. But then there is increasing labor supply in rural areas, not meeting adequate labor demand because of there are many people in rural areas, but there's not much adequate labor demand because business and farming sector, agriculture sector were at standstill. Of course, this is Kharif sowing time, and agricultural employment will pick up very soon. I mean, normally in July, August, this agricultural employment picks up, but this has a seasonal pattern to it, right? So the labor market is picking up, but 16 million new low-end jobs were added last month, as per CMI estimates, right? So we have seen in the last 2 years, 1.5 years of this COVID thing, that it has had unequal effects on different sections in the labor market. You know, India has a dualistic labor market. There is an unorganized sector, which constitutes 92% of the labor force. And then there is this organized sector, which was working from home mostly during the pandemic. So there is one side, on one side, there is this low paying, precarious, relatively less skilled or unskilled and less educated people, workers. They had borne the brunt of the pandemic time unemployment. And on the other, there is this organized sector, which used to actually, work from home. It used to work from home in most cases. The gap between these two sections have literally been accentuated. COVID has exacerbated the gap between the organized sector and unorganized sector in a very big way. So, PLFS data had come very recently, 2019-20, but it doesn't capture much of the pandemic experience. We'll get into that if time permits later on, but it's okay. So you all know probably. Okay, so in the process of this COVID pandemic, what we have seen is that rural wages have been driven down because there has been an influx of migrant labor in times of slowdown and lockdown, when there is a lot of labor supply and not meeting adequate labor demand in the rural market. Obviously, rural wages would go down, right? Now, when the economy is going back into normalcy, these low wages may not see an increase anytime so soon. Get this. So the workers and these rural poor people, they had suffered from a decline in consumption smoothing. So there's something called consumption smoothing, right? It has a seasonal pattern. You have to save something for some periods in future. But during this COVID pandemic, their consumption smoothing cycle has been disturbed. These poor people, rural poor, and these workers, they literally suffered during this COVID time income shock, and they had put off their expenditure plans. Now, this income shock, employment shock, they all have had repercussions for their health and nutrition outcomes in families, which most likely have been affected as well. So we are going to, the other respected panelists will cover the health aspects of it. Then you see our national government, it has undertaken several measures, right, for the negative consequences of the pandemic. It has undertaken, for example, Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan Anna Yojana, disbursed installments under Pradhan Mantri Kisan Yojana, and taken many other steps to boost rural aggregate demand, right? Because in modern days we have aggregate demand driven economies, so mostly. So you have to, when there's a crisis, aggregate demand drops, so people consume less, become inward. So somehow the government has to pitch in Keynesian parlance. So it has to boost aggregate demand, right? So in this regard, some state governments have also come up with innovative job creation schemes to help the informal workers battle the COVID-19 adversities. For example, the Odisha government had come up with an urban version of NREGA, which would employ job seekers in projects like, say, cleaning drains, reclaiming water bodies, planting trees, and etc. This was a very novel scheme. I don't know if it has been undertaken as yet, but should be emulated by other states, as the urban poor can avail some sources of livelihood, right? So the national government has also come up with many post-lockdown corporate bailout programs and fiscal stimulus investments. My other panelists will also discuss this. So these programs were there to help the manufacturing sector get back in step, right? And despite controversies, it has also announced some reforms in factor markets, like the new labor codes, like the farm laws. So going forward, what are actually the economic growth prospects of our country? So unfortunately, both the external and domestic conditions, they don't look that good. Let me tell you how. See, on the external side, the most favorable aspect is actually this, that many advanced economies, they are coming back into economic normalcy. So they're returning back to normal conditions, industrialized economies. And this economic recovery in those advanced economies will create much demand for products from the rest of the world, including our country, including India's. But then, as we have seen in an earlier presentation, these external conditions, they also have their own problems, right? First, you see, there are signs of rising inflation in advanced economies. So in many advanced economies now, inflation is rising, which typically will induce a contractionary monetary policy. So with so a tight monetary policy means rate hikes, interest hikes will be there. You get this? So second, there is a rising concern in advanced economies about the need to normalize this monetary policy thing by increasing interest rates from their near zero levels. Right now, they are almost at near zero levels in those advanced economies. So they somehow, their rates will pick up. As a consequence of rising inflation. And now, as economic growth and inflation will increase in these advanced economies, the pressure to increase interest rates will also grow, right? And once those who have studied some economics here in this audience probably would remember. Otherwise, also it's fine. So once there's something called Mundell-Fleming model, right? So once these foreign interest rates start growing, so capital will fly out of our country. Foreign capital, those FDI, or FIIs, portfolio investors, they will get out of this country. And these forces will make foreign capital more expensive, which will also put downward pressure on an already, dismal investment climate. So, and the cost of finance will increase, right? Now, once these policy rates begin increasing, these interest rates will increase once they start going up. Now it has been unchanged. You have seen the monetary policy review when Dr. Das was actually discussing a while back. So once these policy rates start going up, what will happen? We know that borrowing will be costly. It will affect industrial production and employment. So it will reduce employment again. It will also affect production. And the government in our country is the biggest borrower. So it will also find difficult to borrow money. And of course, currency appreciation will happen. So rupee dollar rate will appreciate. So it's also not a good thing for our domestic exportable goods sector, right? And the third aspect that I'm drawing to your attention is the public debt levels in these advanced economies. They have also increased sharply during this pandemic period. I mean, many other advanced countries, they have also increased their loans, right? They have borrowed more because they had to respond to the crisis, and they had to also go with something called expansionary fiscal policies. So expansionary fiscal policies mean the government spending will increase, right? So government spending will increase, and these economies, the advanced economies, they did not have any sufficient room for fiscal resources, so they had to borrow. So they essentially had these debt-financed fiscal expansions during the pandemic time. Now, going forward, they may be less likely to borrow. I mean, they are more likely to borrow less, which will likely affect aggregate demand, right? And then finally, your global oil prices are there. So an increase in oil prices, that will present yet another hurdle on the external front. And if you look at the domestic economic conditions, we are also, I mean, it was also problematic, right, coming into the pandemic. So that was the reason for the decline in growth rates since 2016. You know, the banking sector, there is a lot of bad loans overhang. In the in the last year, we have seen economic contraction, and this situation may have worsened by now. Then there is a lot of uncertainty around this economic environment, which was already a cause of the slowdown before 2020, and none of these things have gone away as yet, right? And there are many uncertainties regarding this vaccine policy, which has also created a lot of confusion or additional risks regarding the state of public health going forward. But then the government is on its track. So by December, I mean, as per their opinions, probably by December, the whole country would be vaccinated. Of course, these are the things that are going to be discussed, health thing, particularly by another panelist in this discussion. So given this lack of fiscal resources, right, the most feasible and most promising way forward for our government would be to implement supply side policies, supply side interventions. It's easier to implement supply side policies when there is a crisis that has led to a reduction in aggregate demand. Say, raising aggregate demand, raising GDP is a very big thing. It's a relatively more difficult thing than implementing a supply side interventions, like, say, for example, regulatory reforms in labor markets, land markets. These are all supply side measures, right? And these policies will go beyond, I mean, it should go beyond subsuming different codes into one head and calling it a reform, right? So many economists believe that we can only...
Dr. Panda, we may...
Yeah, I'm just finishing.
Okay.
I'm just finishing. So this seat is going to be over. So I'm just finishing. Couple of minutes. So this is I mean, so the only way we can reach our growth is the growth of large scale, low technology manufacturing sector, and this is the only sector that can employ the 10 million new workers joining the labor market annually at wages that reflect their aspirations. So this sector has to grow. And then the disinvestment thing will also be on fast track because the government needs money. And ultimately, what I'm saying is, you see, these deep reforms have to be there. And I mean, some more robust economic reforms have to be there. They obviously yield high economic benefits. They also have political costs. But going forward, the government, as you have seen from its policies for quite some time, it has got this knack of charting a very difficult reform path, but it has done well, and it also has made electoral success. So finally, I mean, if we need more government data to be, I mean, we academics actually need more government data to be out in the open so that we can analyze the situation better. So this is my submission. I thank you so much, and I leave the discussion to my next participant, Dr. Misra. Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity to put forth my views. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Panda. I think I took probably the longer time, so I am the culprit. Okay. Okay, so I now invite Dr. Misra to share his views. Yeah, Dr. Panda, Misra.
So thank you, Amarendra, and thank you. I'll call officially so Dr. Das and Dr. Panda to a very excellent presentation. Because after this meeting, I have another meeting. So I was thinking, so I expected to continue this kind of discussion, and this is really an excellent two presentations on the overall macrofinance and what are the specifics in the labor market, money market. All these things have been covered in these two presentations, and these two are very crucial presentation. And my presentation is basically, let me share a slide. So
Yes.
my presentation is basically on the India's unequal health story, and which says how this could be, how we have already a kind of disproportionate health sector, and there are a lot of deficits and infrastructural gaps in the health sector, which is also disproportionately affected to different group of population. Of course, this is not directly, I can say this is not directly related to the country's economy and country's finance. Still, if you look at the, I mean, if you consider the theory like capability index by Amartya Sen, and also the health and education, these two are very crucial factors which decide the quality human development. And these also, I mean, whatever has been discussed and whatever impacts has been created in the entire economy, this is largely due to the emergency or the issue in the health sector, which is largely responsible for this. So context is COVID-19, and we already know we are going through a very difficult phase, and yes. So we are going through a very difficult phase, and COVID-19 has shattered the entire livelihood options of the of many common people in the country. This is not the case of India. This is, of course, this is the global issue, and this is a global pandemic, and everybody is affected in it. But this has impacted disproportionately to different categories of people. So, and also we have seen that there is a poor public provisioning of health care or the health sector. If you find the rate of investment on health by India, which is the lowest amongst the Brazil, South Africa, Russia, and China, Bhutan, and Sri Lanka, which is so we needs 2.5% of the GDP on the health sector, an investment of that kind of size. Still, we are lying behind somewhere to below 2% of the gross domestic product. Yes. So next is, so what are the key messages we are getting in the current health inequality scenario in our country? This scenario is not only inequality, this is also inadequate. We have a very inadequate health infrastructural facilities, and this is not during pandemic. We have felt the inadequacy, we have felt the inequality during the pandemic, but this has been there before the pandemic. And if you go to any of the primary health center, any of the primary health center, if you go to the state roads, any state-run hospitals, you will find there is a lack of bed, even non-COVID situation. If you have seen, so if you might have seen there is lack of bed, there is non-responsiveness of the doctors, and there is lack of doctors and infrastructure. So those kind of things were already there, and but after COVID, we have already faced two set of, I mean, one at the state level, one at this union level. We have faced two, I mean, two budget sessions, and there are a lot of discussions going on how to rectify the situation. Still, we have faced the brunt of the second wave, where the basic infrastructural facilities like beds in the National Capital Territory of Delhi, and there are lack of ventilators, oxygens were experienced, and availability of infrastructure is not inadequate only. If you find the rural areas having less infrastructure and urban areas are getting better facilities, maybe due to private health sector facilities you are saying, but that in that case also, if you see, they are demanding a very exorbitant prices, and which is also affecting the lower segment of population who are basically slum dwellers in the urban areas. Then in the rural, hilly and other hard to reach areas, like in the tribal sub-plan areas and the scheduled caste areas, those areas also lack of infrastructure. Why I'm saying this? This presentation is a let me also after this say some background of this presentation. I belong to Oxfam India. Oxfam India regularly prepares the inequality report, and this year Oxfam prepared the unequal health story, which depicted the inequality of health infrastructures in different areas for different groups of population as well. So as a part of this, Oxfam has detailed analysis on the how this unequal story were prevailing from the history as well, and from different. You can see the details in our report. Yes. So next is. So these are the numbers which tells us number of things about the health infrastructural facilities in our country. We have now 0.66 doctors for 1,000 population, but World Health Organization has already said we need 1 doctor for 1,000 citizens. But this is again, if World Health Organization is saying 1 doctor for 1,000 citizens, then also we need more doctors, since nowadays health cases and health number of diseases are rising, number of health cases are also rising. So in that case, to lessen the pressure among the doctors, we need more number of doctors, and in the country we have less as per the norm fixed by the World Health Organization. So in terms of allopathic doctors, 1 government allopathic doctor for every around 10,000 people. So 1 allopathic doctor manages 10,000 people, and 1 state-run hospital for every 90,000 people. So it's very precarious. When we were this kind of situation, this is not during only COVID. So if you'll see, this was their pre-COVID situation, and we are facing the pandemic in this kind of health environment and health infrastructural facilities. That is a shortfall of almost 45,000, if you see, 43,000 sub-centers, which is the closest to the community, and which is the, this is the major health center at the community level. If something happens at the communities, then this is the sub-center which solves the immediate need of the communities, and there is a shortfall of primary health centers, which is around 20% as per mandated, as per the IPHS norms, Indian Public Health Standard norms. If you see, so we are lagging behind of 28% and 37% of the CSs. There is a lack of community health centers. So these are all health facilities which are at the primary level, and then these are the health centers which can serve the rural communities, hard to reach areas, tribal people. So these also centers provide a very less, no price, no cost health facilities these centers provide. But still, these centers, we are facing the pandemic in this kind of gaps. Only around 50,000 health and wellness centers are functional. Health and wellness center is a very creative idea designed by the current government in 2018, I guess. So, and this is many of the community health centers and primary health centers were targeted to convert it into health and wellness center, but only 65% of the cumulative target in 2020-21 has been completed out of 50,000. Out of total target. So we need to convert these health and these primary health centers to the health and wellness center, but till that we have not adequately done it. So next is we have only 0.5 hospital beds per 1,000 population, against again World Health Organization has recommended 5 beds for 1,000 population. So this is again a very difficult situation for India to face this pandemic, and there is a case of inequality. If you'll see, the rural population in India, we have around 70% of the population live in rural areas, but only 40% of the total hospital beds are located for the rural areas. So there are more facility for the urban people and less facility for the rural people. And if you visit any primary health center, you will find 1 or 2 hospital beds are there, which is a kind of abandoned situation. Nobody will be there to take care of those beds. But if you see in the urban primary health centers, there are the lot of facilities you will see in the urban areas. Of course, in addition, as a part of supplementary, there are lot of private health institutions there to serve the urban people. Then government hospitals in rural areas have 1 bed for 3,430 people, while in urban areas there is 1 bed for 869 people. This is an interesting statistics to see. And 1 bed serves 869 people in urban areas. That means urban people are getting more beds than the rural areas. 1 government hospital for every 42,500 people in rural areas, and 1 government hospital is 89,142 for urban areas. So that's the next. So this in this condition, we are targeting, government of India had targeted for the urban, universal healthcare, and they are always saying, government policies are always saying they are providing better healthcare facilities, maybe through a big scheme called Ayushman Bharat. Government nowadays, if you'll see the history, and you can see the details analysis in the report as well. The history always relied on the insurance facilities for the patients or for the citizens. So once insurance is done, then government feels everything is, universal healthcare is assured for those citizens. But there are 8 nowadays, as of 2020, there are 8 operational central government funded health insurance schemes are available in the country. And there are also, in addition to this, there are a lot of state-specific schemes are available. 49 state-specific schemes are available in different states. However, these schemes and these insurance facilities have not been successful in reducing the out-of-pocket expenditure, because the out-of-pocket expenditure is in India is 64.2% in India, is higher than the world average of 18.2%. That means we are spending 64.2% of the entire expenditure, health expenditure, from our own pocket, and we average out-of-pocket expenditure is 2,394 per hospitalization. Over, my previous presenters has already said how many people are being pushed to the poverty due to this pandemic. But every year due to this health expenditure and this out-of-pocket expenditure, 63 million people are pushed to poverty in every year. So that's the major concern for our state. And around 74% of the hospital, I'm talking about the NSSO data, because these are all secondary information. So I have not mentioned the sources of information due to lack of space. So 74% of the hospitalized expenditure is financed through the savings. Entire saving is being consumed, and 74% means significantly savings has been used for the hospitalized expenditure, and 20% of expenditure is financed through borrowing. Next. So the amount of claim paid for individual under Ayushman Bharat is 11,545, whereas the average medical expenditure for hospitalization 60,676 in rural areas and 26,000 in urban areas. Whatever amount the Ayushman Bharat pays, that is not enough to meet the cost of the hospitalization and cost of the expenditures. More of the number of claims paid, as per, this is the secondary data we have used, the Ayushman Bharat's website data. Only 65% of the total admissions, they have been reimbursed, whereas rest 35% were not paid. So, this is a kind of, in this situation, we cannot rely on the insurance facilities. We cannot say insurance facilities can can make us, provide us facilities to the universal healthcare system. So in that way, next. So this is the case in the current scenario with regard to healthcare facilities and healthcare infrastructural facilities. But if you look at the NFHS data, National Family Health Survey data, you'll find there are inequalities in the caste, gender, and wealth-based inequalities across different health indicators, and I assume that has been historically existing in our country. So I'm talking some of the figures. 66% of the general household. This is the caste-based inequality you see. 66% of the general households have access to improved non-shared sanitation facilities in the general category. And you'll find, and the sanitation facility is the major determinant of the health condition. And you will find much less for the SCs and STs, which are around 29% or 30% close to, and STs are 40% behind the general category. So this is the state of, general categories are quite a good condition in terms of accessing this improved non-shared sanitation facilities. Then for the top and bottom people, if you'll see, 93.4% of the households in the top 20% have access to improved sanitation, whereas bottom 20% in the wealth quintile, we have only 6% have access to this facility of improved sanitation. So this kind of stark inequality you will find in the health sector. Another case you will see, in the top 20 and bottom 20% of the wealth quintile, top child immunization for top 20% is 17%, and higher than the bottom 20%. Bottom 20%, that is top 20% is 70% and bottom 20% is 50%, 52%. So this is the scenario, and we have also seen the full antenatal care and stunted children for SCs and stunted children for general category. There is a huge gap. So this kind of situation you will find in the health sector, and we have tried to assess the response of the different categories of household during pandemic and how the administration responds to different households. One in every five households, that is 20% of households with monthly income of around 30% or less, they have raised issues related to attitude of the medical staff. And in the highest income bracket, those kind of attitude problem was not there. That means if the higher income, if there is a COVID case, this is a survey during COVID-19. Yeah, and if you have COVID, then if you belong to a higher income group, then doctors will not and behaves you very good behavior. But in the low income group, you will find the doctors doesn't behave very well. So that's the situation. And around 33.9% of female respondents, they said that they experienced feelings of anxiousness, anger, irritation, sleep deprivation, whereas 18%. That is a case of gender inequality in the impact of COVID-19 during. This is the survey done by Oxfam India in the first wave. So gender equality is quite acute in case of the, and these are some of the evidences. There are detailed things you will find in the report. Households with the lower income face 5 times discrimination in attitude of the neighbors. When you will be detected COVID positive, then the neighbors' attitude changes. Then so everybody tries to, there is a very negative impression comes from the communities, which doesn't happen for the higher income groups, but the lower income groups have faced huge discrimination in the COVID first wave. That also suggests, we have tried to estimate what is the level, what is the kind of relation with regard to effort to reduce inequality versus the cases of positive cases as well as the recovery cases. And we have tried to see the states attempting to reduce inequality in the first few years are more likely to experience lower number of COVID positive cases. And we have referred the attempt to reduce inequality from the SDG data, Sustainable Development Goal Index, which is formulated by NITI Aayog, and we have we have tried to build a kind of regression amongst these two variables, and we found there is the low and the high, I mean, more attempt to reduce inequality will there is a possibility of lowering the number of positive cases. And there are also cases seen the states who spend more on the health have a higher likelihood of recovery. So the more expenditure that means the more recovery you will be facing. Yes, next. So these are the suggestions, and these are the way forward thing. We need to enact the right to health, and we need to increase the health spending to 2.5% of the gross domestic product, and we need to have a special allocation for the special category of people, ensuring special budget allocation for the SCs and SCs as per their proportionate. So then you also need centers should extend the financial support to states having low per capita health expenditure. Then there is a need to regulate the private health sector, and also the health insurance schemes. We need to widen the ambit of the health insurance schemes, because lot of outpatient care expenses are not covered in the health insurance schemes. Next. And also for the provision, there is a need for provision of free essential docs and diagnostic services. Yes. So this is my, yes. So you can download the details of the report from here. So since I have another meeting, I have very quickly presented the situation of health inequality in India. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mishra. Now I directly invite Mr. Om Mahapatra to share his views on the corporate sector, the share market, and so on. Yes, yes.
Thank you, Dr. Das. So my work has become a little easier now after the beautiful presentation by Dr. Das, Dr. Panda, and Dr. Mishra. And I would be mostly covering on 4 topics. So one would be, everybody is anxious to know why is the stock market roaring despite that there has been a contraction in the GDP. And one more big question that everybody has got need an answer to that. If the GDP is contracting, why is the GST collections are rising on month-on-month basis? And the third aspect which I would be covering would be, is disinvestment necessary for India's economy as a whole? We would be talking about recent budget, announcement of the recent budget. And the fourth, as I am from the markets, stock markets, I will be covering 2 sectors majorly. One would be auto sector, and second would be real estate sector. And I would be doing a peer comparison of peer companies' stock market movements over the period of 1 year. So the first aspect which I said, as everybody knows that when we got hit by pandemic last year, nobody knew, it was unprecedented, and it was like nobody had a chance to know what is going to be our next future. So was the market as well. But at this point of time, as you see, as the slide shows, that the market at today's figure, it is around 55,000, which is actually the all-time high. 55,000 benchmark is the all-time high which has crossed today. And when you see last year, March, when we got hit by a pandemic, we had reached to a level of 23,000 basis points. So basis of that, when the GDP is contracting, how is that the economy, is the Sensex a true reflector of the of the economy or not? So I will be covering that. Indian markets are at all-time high despite of volley of bad news. COVID-19 still remains a colossal threat, with barely a tenth of our adult population fully vaccinated. This means a potential third wave may be inevitable, which might lead to frequent lockdowns, low personal incomes, and consumptions. Third wave would be a perfect storm in which demand has eviscerated and national income is yet to to levels reached 2 years back. In other words, ordinary folk are suffering through an unprecedented economic vacuum. Inflation is highly fueled by insane taxes on fuel and record commodity and food prices. And now inflation is filtering through the manufactured goods as well. The government, on the other hand, is borrowing insatiably, and this is throwing the bond yields out of kilter. The central bank, I mean the RBI, is trying every hook and corner and using all its tactics to hold the interest rates down, but the logic of market is relentless. That is, the interest rates will rise for sure. Dr. Panda has also addressed in his discussion, in his detailed discussion, that interest rates are going to rise in the West very soon. So, when I discuss now about that, America's Federal Bank has already indicated it is ready to raise interest rates earlier than expected. That is, it could stop creating reckless money in what it called taper tantrum tools. All of this, high inflation, low demand, shrinking national income, high interest rates, and a tapering federal would be a terrible news for stock market. Yes, it's a terrible news as stock market is at all-time high. Now, there are three pivotal reasons why the stock market is down. One of the main reasons is that in a tidal wave of cheap money that has been created in the West, especially in America, which has inflated asset prices all across the world. Indian stock market too have been buoyed by this unrelenting inflows of dollars, showing forex reserves as amounting to around $600 billion. So when you see FPIs, foreign portfolio investors, they're finding money, I mean the return on investments when they're investing in the West, mostly in the West, the returns are very low. So they are investing in emerging markets, in Asian markets, in India. And India being one of the fastest growing, they have invested and around $600 billion have been infused into stock markets since last year. But India has been also a host of unique and accelerating phenomenon that has played out invisibly but violently over the last 5 years. Dr. Panda has also highlighted that India has been going through slowdown and to lockdown in 2020. So, with demonetization in 2016 and the launch of GST in 2017, and finally the hit of COVID, which has led to a digital revolution in India. These three forces, demonetization, launch of GST, and digitization in India, this has actually formalized the India's economy. When I say formalization, that means many corporates are getting organized, which means that this organized corporates, or we can say the listed companies, which are around 1,000 companies listed in NSE and BSE, 1,000 companies are actually swallowing the share of small, unorganized, informal sectors. You can say MSMEs. Let's put it this way. The footprint of the organized sector, that is, you can say the listed companies, has expanded in a national income, creating extremely high profitability for bigger companies. Their market shares have increased, their product prices have increased. On the other hand, wages and self-employed earnings have fallen. That means the national income remains 100 and the share of organized corporates that has gone up. Now let me tell you what is stock market in elementary terms. Stock market is a sum of the market values of big companies. It is often mistaken. We believe that the stock market is a barometer of the entire economy. Stock market only captures and represents the value of handful of large companies, not more than 1,000 companies, as I mentioned earlier. These large companies are posting an annual growth rate of 40%. So where is this 40% coming? So this is coming at the cost of unorganized business houses, MSMEs, as I mentioned earlier. So it's a sine qua non that the indices which capture these values, that is Sensex and Nifty, are hitting all-time high. Ironically, therefore, one of the reasons that the stock markets are high is because of the vicious pain inflicted on the rest of the economy. Second reason, which I have articulated, that is people are going through a phenomenon called FOMO, fear of missing out. Last 1 year saw a number of IPOs, a very number of IPOs coming in the market, and all the IPOs being oversubscribed. When people borrow crazily to invest in IPOs, which we saw recently last 9-10 months, which have a questionable valuation, the market fall seems inevitable. Let me give one more example. Press fund raisings is now at 14 years high, and we have got a lot of year to go. For example, Zomato's IPO coming, which saw a spectacular debut, and now the upcoming IPO of Paytm, another loss-making new age company which is looking to scoop up over $2 billion, that is around 15,000 crores, to raise funds through the IPO. India's history, when illiquid shares of unlisted companies are rising at 20 to 30% in a month in the grey market. When people with long memories forget what triggered the horrible crash in 2008, when market crashed by 75%. To refresh our memory, it was an IPO of Anil Ambani's Reliance Power, which got bids of rupees 8 lakh crores. Now I give a disclaimer here that these examples are directly comparable, but Zomato got a demand of over rupees 2 lakh crores, which is the third highest ever fund raised by any company in India's stock market history. Markets have become frothy when the proverbial panwalas begins to give you a stock tips. This can be an indication that the top and the end is near. So this is the first aspect which I covered. Why the stock markets are roaring despite economies or the GDP is contracting. Now the second aspect which I will be covering, why is GST collections are creating all-time high in every month on a month-on-month basis despite contraction of GDP. I am claiming the high GST collections is not because of better economic conditions or performance, but it is because of the better GST collections. The way to connect or address can be of three major reasons. One major reason is that the currency or the money that is being circulated in numbers. We saw in January to March, the quarter, you can say the last quarter of financial year 2021, an increase in money circulation because of the digital revolution. From a versus of last year of 2020, there has been more of money circulation of around 1 lakh crores. Or in other words, people have made more purchases in an electronic format or from a digital format rather than in cash format. And the moment you do that in a digital format or in an electronic format, that is an indication that they essentially paid tax on that transaction, which they might not have paid if that transaction would have happened in a cash. So it is a clear indication that a large part of GST increase which we are seeing is coming out of better tax collections. This means once we are out of this COVID situation after a couple of quarters, on a structural basis, if those loopholes have been plotted and addressed, then the tax collections on GST particularly will be much higher. At this moment, it appears to us the financial year 2022 budget estimates the GST tax collections has been taken at very modest level. So it's possible for government to exceed that estimate. Second reason, so can you go to next slide? So as you see in this bar chart, so you see a GST month-on-month collections. So when we got hit by COVID last year, all the economic activities got shut down. When all the economic activities got shut down and the economy was on a standstill and there was no economic movement, there was no transactions happening. So when the transactions were not happening then, so the GST collections had fallen to an all-time low. And people were in a fear that what is going to be the next. So people were in a saving mode, on an over-saving mode, and they tried to restrict their spending. As and when the news of vaccines came out and the festive season started coming out during October, November, people got that animal instinct which was restricted for a very long time, that made them to spend for next 7-8 months, and which led to growing of economic activities and further increase of GST collections. Third, one of the reason which I can articulate, as everybody knows, as Aminder sir has already said in his discussion, that there has been a rise in inflations, and due to the insane fuel taxes, and due to this price inflation, the commodity prices have increased. The gross value added and the GDP, they have contracted. When we say the gross value added has contracted, that means the output has not grown up. So once the output has not grown up, how come the GST collections had gone up? One more reason is that the price inflation, once the price goes up, obviously the taxes on the prices, that goes up. On an absolute value, that goes up. So these are the basic 3 reasons why GST collections have gone up over a period of this 7-8 months. The next aspect which I would be discussing about is disinvestment necessary. So I personally feel that disinvestment will be for real, and the way government needs resources. See, why do we create assets? When do we create assets? We create assets for our difficult times. So this is the time for India. I would like to watch majorly 2-3 companies to be disinvested in this year, including BPCL, CCIL, Container Corporation of India Limited, Shipping Corporation, Air India, and Life Insurance Corporation. Let me just take you back. I was going through the market era of United Kingdom. This is a classic example. Back in 1978 to 1982 in UK, the GDP growth rate of UK was minus. It was actually minus. They were actually going behind. They were degrowth was happening there. So when they started doing the disinvestment, they started growing at 5% plus GDP growth rate for the next 10 years. Companies, be that British Airways, British Petroleum, and many other companies actually got a rebirth. In this budget, Modi government announced for privatizing 100 units or companies. And when this 100 companies are actually privatized, this will become a massive revolution for India's economy. This will actually unleash a lot of value, or unleash economic growth for India. However, we are a democratic country where things are not easy to do as we want what we want actually to do. If this happens, I see a big play out for the economy. Most of these are actually leaders, be that BPCL or be that CCIL, they are actually leaders. So once we give that leeway, the free hand to operate by themselves with a good team member, with a good professional team, obviously the size of this disinvestment and the effect of the disinvestment are going to be real. So we will go to real estate. Sir, slides, more slides. I just skipped. Okay. So we can begin. Just a couple of slides back. Maruti, auto sector we can begin. So as I had said that I would be covering 4 aspects. So I'll come back to the markets. So when we talk about stock markets, and auto sector is a very huge sector which employs around 3 crore population directly and indirectly. And auto sector, which as I said that employs 3 crore population, and Maruti being a part of car segment within the auto sector, we should I thought of highlighting the numbers, sales numbers. So when I said that economic activities had actually fallen last year due to COVID wave, unprecedented COVID wave, and nobody actually knew the auto sector, which had been going through a very dark phase from the slowdown stage since the 2018. It had a very hard hit. Out of every sector, auto sector got a very hard hit. The sales number had fallen to around a quarter, which had performed as per the figures in 2019. But as and when, as I said, in last year, the festive season came and we saw the news of vaccination coming. The figures, as you can see in the slides, the Maruti, which is the leader in the car segment, came a bounce back with the December, January, February, March, and April month figure. The units being mostly in the bracket of 1.59 to 1.6, 1.65 lakh per units. This again got hit by the second COVID wave, and this has come down to today's figure of around 78,000, 85,000 sales per unit, as per the figures in June and July. But as you can see, sir, the next slide, sir. As you can see, the markets, how they have been performing. The markets, as I had said, that they had got a very hard hit. So is being reflected in this pictorial graph, where the markets in 13th of August 2020 is showing 6731, and presently it is roaring at 7,000. So it had gone to a good heights post first COVID wave, before being hit by second COVID wave, which was around in January. You can see 8329 was the figure. So this is about the car segment. Next would be Hero. Hero being a two-wheeler leader in the two-wheeler segment, and which comes under the auto sector. It had also got a very hard hit after this auto sector hit. As the graph, as the number shows, the units were on an average of 3.75 to 4.5, and this had also got a hit in the second COVID wave, and it has come down to around 2.1 to 2.5 in this last 3 months. So as per the SIAM, the industry saw a 14% decline in the sales volume, be that in the car segment, or be that in a two-wheeler segment, or in the commercial segment. The pictorial graph also saw a fall after the second COVID wave. So this has been the decline, this has been the economics of the sector and the performance in the sales sector, which is being reflected in the Sensex or in the stock prices. We would be representing now on the real estate side. So housing saw a major trend. So according to industry estimate, the experts say the second COVID wave may pause the realty sales momentum for now, but the demand sets to rise in Q3 2021. It was actually performing after the first COVID wave before being hit by a second COVID wave. In a bid to boost the demand for the real estate, the government also extended the benefit of credit-linked subsidy scheme by a year. They enhanced the scheme by a year to the next March 2022, which was actually hurting Prime Minister Modi's objective of housing for all by 2022. As per the Atmanirbhar Bharat Yojana, Swami Fund, which was introduced, which is basically the last mile funding for the stalled projects, it has actually been found by amount of 30,000 crores. Real estate sector has almost bounced back, and they were back to pre-COVID levels before being hit by second COVID wave and subsequent lockdowns. As per CREDAI, nearly 25% construction laborers have gone back, although this time we did not see mass exodus. Last year we saw a supply side disruption because there was a reverse migration happening, mostly from the construction laborers moving towards their villages. But this supply side disruption has been controlled to a very bigger extent by the developers, and this transition in the real estate, I mean, this has actually changed the thought process of the buyers, the consumers. The COVID has actually changed the behavioral buying, or the consumer behavioral thing of the buyers. So the real estate trends, which we can say that housing is going to be a greater share in customer wallet going forward. If we put aside the temporary disruption, be that Q1 and Q2 that happened in this 2000 financial year 2022, housing will come back roaring like second half of financial year 2022. This is a trend not only in India but across the world. People have actually realized the importance of housing because of the low EMIs and no GST on ready-made homes. The second aspect which we saw the trends, commercial real estate has actually been discouraged and people are preferring for residential thing because work from home facilities has gone deep roots to our habits. Tier 2 and tier 3 cities, people are finding a more growth in real estate sector over tier 1 or major 8 cities because there has been a river migration where people are finding it work from home and work from anywhere. They are finding the local developers for buying any kind of real estate rather than buying in a metropolitan cities. The fourth trend which we saw, people have gone for an upgradation for a luxury homes or a premium homes or for a penthouses or a second homes. Affordable homes are going for a struggle because affordable homes are being bought by middle class or a lower middle class groups which are finding a low personal income because of this second COVID wave. So these are the aspects which we can cover in the real estate side. These are the business economic side. So if we majorly constitute the real estate sector, I have taken two examples. One is a DLF. So second slide. Next slide. And the other is the Godrej. So you can go one slide behind. So when we go to DLF, we can see the prices have actually been roaring despite of the second COVID wave hit. It is because the demand still persists for housing, as people are preferring to buy an upgradation of home or for a second home or for a luxury home. So DLF, which caters mostly for a luxury homes, that their demand has not been diluted because of the second COVID wave. So these are the aspects which we have covered in this real estate side. We would conclude with this, and since we are running out of time, so I have skipped BFSI and many other sectors as well. So, Amin sir, this is okay for you? Any of our times up?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Mahapatra. Okay.